I used to think the deepest pain a father could feel was watching his children suffer. But I was wrong. The true agony is watching them look at you and wish you were dead. They thought I was just a fading old man whose usefulness had expired, entirely unaware of the silent trap they were eagerly walking into. I am 68 years old, and for 40 of those years, I worked as a heavy machinery mechanic. Even now, if you look closely at my hands, you can see the faint, dark lines of grease permanently worked into the creases of my skin. It is the physical proof of a lifetime spent under the hoods of trucks and tractors, busting my knuckles and straining my back to make sure my family never went without. My wife, Mary, was the heart of our home. She was a gentle, patient woman who managed our finances with a tight fist and a warm smile, ensuring that every extra dime went into a savings account for our 2 children, Marcus and Chloe. We gave them everything. We skipped vacations for 20 years so Marcus could go to a prestigious out-of-state university without taking on crippling debt. I worked double shifts, sometimes clocking 70 hours a week, so Chloe could have her dream wedding and a hefty down payment for her first townhouse. We wanted them to start their lives on third base, free from the financial struggles Mary and I endured in our early 20s. We succeeded. Today, Marcus is a mid-level executive at a tech firm, and Chloe runs a boutique public relations agency. They wear clothes that cost more than my first car, and they drive vehicles with leather seats and payments they complain about constantly. But when Mary passed away 2 years ago from a sudden, aggressive illness, the glue that held our family together dissolved overnight. At first, I thought their emotional distance was just their way of grieving. They rarely visited the hospital during her final weeks, claiming they were too busy with work and could not bear to see their mother looking so frail. I gave them a pass. I absorbed the crushing weight of Mary's death entirely on my own, sitting in the front pew of the church with a hollow chest while my children stood beside me, checking their expensive watches. After the funeral, the house we had shared for 35 years felt cavernous. It is a beautiful 4-bedroom colonial sitting on a half-acre lot in a highly sought-after neighborhood. More importantly, it is completely paid off. It did not take long for me to realize that Marcus and Chloe did not see my house as a home filled with cherished memories of their mother. They saw it as an uncashed check. Their visits dwindled to once a month, then to obligatory holiday appearances, and when they did come over, the atmosphere was suffocating. They spoke to me with thinly veiled contempt, using a slow, loud voice, as if my hearing was fading along with my relevance. They would roll their eyes when I told stories they had heard before. They would sigh heavily if I asked for help setting up a new feature on my phone. I became a chore. I became an obstacle. The shattering realization of their true nature happened just last month, during a Sunday dinner that I had spent all afternoon preparing. I made Mary's famous pot roast, a dish that used to bring them running to the kitchen. They arrived an hour late, smelling of expensive wine and complaining about the traffic. Throughout the meal, Marcus kept his phone on the table, answering emails and waving me off when I asked about his job. Chloe picked at her food, making a passive-aggressive comment about how red meat was bad for a man my age and how the house smelled old and dusty. I tried to keep the peace. I swallowed my pride and went into the kitchen to fetch the dessert I had baked. As I was cutting the pie, I heard their voices drifting from the dining room. They were not arguing, they were negotiating. We cannot just leave him rattling around in this massive house forever. Marcus, Chloe whispered fiercely. The property taxes alone are eating into his pension, and the market in this area is peaking right now. We could get $800,000 for this place easily. I know, Marcus replied, his voice flat and calculating. But he is stubborn. He will never sell it voluntarily. He thinks he is going to die in that master bedroom just like Mom. So we do not give him a choice, Chloe said, her tone devoid of a single ounce of empathy. He has been getting so forgetful lately. Did you see how long it took him to figure out the television remote last week? If we get a doctor to sign off that he is experiencing cognitive decline, we can get medical power of attorney. We sell the house, stick him in that assisted living facility over on Elm Street, the cheap one. He doesn't need luxury and we split the equity. I need the capital for my agency, and you have that massive tax bill coming up. I stood perfectly still in the kitchen, the silver pie server trembling in my grease-stained hand. They were planning to evict me from my own home, declare me mentally unfit, and lock me away in a discount nursing home just to fund their extravagant lifestyles. They were talking about me as if I were a broken-down tractor ready to be sold for scrap metal. There was no hesitation. There was no guilt in their voices. They felt entitled to the wealth Mary and I had literally broken our backs to accumulate. I closed my eyes, a cold, hard knot forming in my stomach. The grief of losing my wife was suddenly overshadowed by a profound, suffocating betrayal. The children we had sacrificed everything for had turned into greedy, soulless parasites. I set the pie server down quietly. I took a deep breath, smoothing my expression into a mask of benign, clueless old age. I walked back into the dining room carrying the dessert plates, offering them a shaky, oblivious smile. They immediately stopped talking, putting on fake smiles of their own. "Here we go, kids," I said, making my voice sound a little weaker, a little more tired than it actually was. "Mom's apple pie." "Thanks, Dad," Marcus said smoothly, glancing at his sister. "You know, you shouldn't be tiring yourself out baking. Maybe it's time you start thinking about downsizing. Making your life easier? Oh, I don't know," I mumbled, playing the part perfectly. "I wouldn't even know where to begin." They exchanged a look of triumphant conspiracy, entirely blind to the fact that they had just declared war on a man who had spent 40 years learning how to take complicated, broken machines apart piece by piece. They were calculating their inheritance, completely unaware that their profound disrespect had just ignited a meticulously timed mechanism of my own, a plan that would leave them utterly devastated. A heavy secret can burn a hole right through your pocket, but the realization that the people you love most might destroy you for it turns that fire to ice. I had no idea just how far Chloe was willing to go to secure her agency's future, but the trap I was about to lay would expose every dark corner of her ambition. Every Friday afternoon for 35 years, Mary and I shared a quiet, unbreakable ritual. I would clock out of the garage, wash the heavy industrial soap from my hands, and stop by the corner bodega on my drive home. I would walk up to the counter and purchase exactly one single lottery ticket for $2. We always played the exact same numbers. They were not random. They were the numerical story of our lives together. The month we met, the day Marcus was born, the day Chloe arrived, the street number of our first tiny apartment, and the date of our wedding anniversary, it was never truly about expecting to strike it rich. It was about the shared dream we engaged in every Saturday morning. Mary would pour us cheap diner coffee at the kitchen table, the sun streaming through the blinds, and we would pass the ticket back and forth. We would spend an hour talking about what we would do if our numbers ever came up. Mary dreamed of buying a piece of land upstate, building a house with a wraparound porch, and planting an acre of blue hydrangeas. I just wanted a boat sturdy enough to take the kids fishing on the weekends, and the peace of mind knowing we would never have to worry about a medical bill or a mortgage payment ever again. After Mary died, the Saturday morning conversation stopped, but I kept buying the ticket, every Friday, $2. It felt like a tether to her spirit, a silent conversation with the ghost of the woman I had built my entire world around. It was a habit of grief more than a game of chance. It was exactly 3 days after that agonizing Sunday dinner. It was a late Wednesday evening. The lottery drawing had taken place the night before, but I had been too distracted by the memory of my children plotting my exile to even check the results. I was sitting alone in my worn leather recliner, the television muttering the local news to an empty room. My joints ached from the changing weather. I reached into my back pocket, pulled out my battered leather wallet, and retrieved the small slip of paper. I picked up my tablet from the side table and navigated to the state lottery website. The screen cast a pale blue glow across the darkened living room. I looked at the winning numbers posted at the top of the page. I looked at my ticket. The first number was a match. The month we met. The second number was a match. Marcus's birthday. The third number was a match. Chloe's birthday. My breath caught in my throat. My vision blurred slightly, and I had to take off my reading glasses, wipe them on my flannel shirt, and put them back on. The fourth number matched our old apartment. The fifth number matched our anniversary. I slowly dragged my eyes to the final red circle on the screen, the power number. I looked down at my thumb, which was covering the last number on the physical ticket. I slid my thumb away. It matched. I sat perfectly paralyzed in the recliner. The silence of the house suddenly felt deafening. I looked at the estimated jackpot listed in bold, bright letters right above the winning numbers. $50 million. I said the words aloud to the empty room, my voice trembling, sounding thin and fragile. $50 million. I checked the date on the ticket. I refreshed the web page. I checked the date again. I was holding a small, flimsy piece of paper that was worth $50 million. My very first instinct was an overwhelming, blinding wave of pure joy. It was the instinct of a father who had spent his entire adult life fixing things, providing for his family, and sacrificing his own comfort to ensure his children had a better life. The sheer magnitude of the wealth washed over me, instantly erasing the ache in my bones and the heavy, suffocating sorrow in my chest. I scrambled for my phone resting on the arm of the chair. I unlocked the screen and went straight to my contacts. I scrolled to Marcus's name. I could solve everything. I could pay off his looming tax bill tomorrow morning without making a single dent in the principal. I could fully fund Chloe's failing public relations agency, buy her out of whatever massive financial hole she was hiding, and secure trust funds for grandchildren I did not even have yet. I pictured the looks on their faces. I imagined the tears of absolute relief. I envisioned the sudden realization that their old, grease-stained father had saved the day one final time. I wanted to call them, tell them to get in their expensive cars and rush over immediately. I wanted to open a bottle of the good champagne I had been saving since Mary passed and celebrate until the sun came up over the horizon. I wanted to be their hero again, the man who fixed everything. My thumb hovered over the green call button. The screen glowed against my weathered skin. But then the memory of Sunday evening hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. I heard Chloe's voice echoing in my mind, sharp and cold, calculating the equity in my home while I was in the next room cutting a pie. I heard Marcus readily agreeing to have me declared legally incompetent, plotting to strip away my autonomy just to get his hands on the deed. I remembered the absolute contempt in their eyes as they watched me struggle with the television remote. A small moment of weakness they immediately weaponized as proof of my declining mind. My thumb froze. The screen of my phone timed out and went black, plunging the corner of the room back into shadows. Marcus had a network of ruthless corporate lawyers at his disposal, and giving him even a hint of this jackpot before I was ready would be like handing a loaded weapon to a starving wolf. If I told them about the $50 million right now, what would actually happen? Would they suddenly love me? Or would they just love the unfathomable wealth I possessed? Would they use this fortune to ensure my final years were comfortable and dignified? Or would it simply accelerate their vicious plan to lock me away? With $50 million on the line, how much faster would they push to get medical power of attorney? How much quicker would they throw me into a locked ward just so they could seize control of the estate? I slowly lowered the phone to my lap. The initial, euphoric joy completely evaporated. In its place, a profound, chilling clarity settled over me. They did not deserve this money. Not yet. Not unless they could prove that they still possessed a shred of human decency. A sliver of the moral foundation Mary and I had tried so desperately to build in them. I needed to know, beyond any shadow of a doubt, who my children truly were when they believed they held all the power. I needed to test them. I looked down at the winning ticket resting in my palm. It was so small, yet more powerful than any engine I had ever rebuilt. I carefully folded the ticket and slid it deep into my wallet, tucking it behind a worn photograph of Mary. I did not call Marcus. I did not call Chloe. I sat alone in the dark, the television still murmuring in the background, and I began to formulate a mechanism to test the strength of their greed against the bonds of our blood. If they proved themselves worthy, we would share the world. If they failed, I would ensure they received exactly the inheritance they had earned. A man who spends his entire life taking massive engines apart learns exactly how to assemble a flawless trap. And my daughter was about to walk right into a beautifully engineered disaster. I knew exactly which buttons to push to trigger her predatory instincts, but I had to make sure the bait was absolutely perfect before she snapped her jaws shut. I woke up before dawn on Thursday morning with a clarity I had not felt since Mary passed away. The crippling grief that usually pinned me to the mattress had been replaced by a cold, methodical focus. I made a pot of strong black coffee, drank it in the silent kitchen, and then walked out to my detached garage. I flipped on the harsh overhead fluorescent lights and stood before my old, scarred wooden workbench. For decades, this bench had been covered in greasy carburetors, stripped gears, and shattered alternators. Today, it was the staging ground for the most important psychological test of my life. I needed a decoy. I could not risk my children finding the real ticket, but I needed them to believe they had discovered my massive secret. I drove my old pickup truck down to the corner bodega right as the sun began to rise. I bought a morning paper, a pack of gum, and a brand new, randomly generated lottery ticket for the exact same drawing that had taken place 2 nights ago. The date, the timestamp, and the specific draw code printed on the top and bottom of the paper were all entirely accurate. The only things wrong were the 6 numbers printed across the center. I returned to my workbench and gathered my tools. I did not need heavy wrenches or socket sets today. I needed the precision instruments I used for delicate gauge repairs. I pulled out a jeweler's magnifying glass, a pair of needle-nosed tweezers, a fresh, razor-sharp hobby knife, and a tiny bottle of specialized matte adhesive that dried completely clear. I brought out a stack of my old, losing lottery tickets from the past few months. It took me 4 hours of agonizing, microscopic labor. My hands, usually so accustomed to gripping heavy steel, cramped from the delicate work, but I did not stop. I carefully sliced the correct winning numbers from the old tickets, lifting only the printed black ink and the absolute thinnest, microscopic layer of paper beneath it, holding my breath to keep my hands steady. I used the tweezers to place the winning numbers directly over the losing numbers on the new ticket, securing them with a microscopic drop of the matte adhesive. I matched the font perfectly. I aligned the spacing flawlessly. I accounted for the slight thermal printer degradation that always happened on the edges of the numbers. When the adhesive was dry, I gently rubbed a tiny pinch of fine gray dust from my shop floor over the surface to give the paper a slightly worn, handled appearance. To a trained state lottery official under a microscope, it would be an obvious forgery. But to the naked eye of a greedy, hasty daughter snooping through her old father's belongings, it was a flawless counterfeit of a $50 million miracle. With the decoy resting safely on the workbench, I went back into the house and retrieved the real ticket from my wallet. My heart hammered against my ribs as I held the genuine fortune. I drove straight to the First National Bank on Main Street. I walked up to the manager's desk and requested to rent their largest available safe deposit box. The manager, a kind woman who had known Mary and me for 15 years, asked if I was doing all right. I gave her a warm, tired smile and told her I was just organizing some of Mary's old jewelry to pass down to the kids. The lie tasted bitter on my tongue, but it was a necessary armor. I walked into the cold, silent steel vault. The bank employee left me alone in the small privacy booth. I placed the small slip of paper into the long metal tin, closed the lid, and locked it away in the wall. The heavy, echoing thud of the steel vault door clanging shut behind me was the most comforting sound I had heard in 2 years. The fortune was completely insulated. No matter what happened next, no matter what lies my children told or what lawyers they hired, they could not touch the real money. Now, the game could officially begin. I knew Chloe's habits better than she knew them herself. ever since her mother died. Chloe had taken it upon herself to occasionally drop by the house unannounced. She always claimed she was checking up on me, but I knew she just wanted a quiet place to escape her chaotic office or to complain about her incompetent employees. But she never just sat and talked to me. She paced the house. She touched things. She constantly opened my mail on the kitchen counter, claiming she was helping me stay organized. She would open desk drawers looking for a pen and conveniently linger over my open bank statements. She was a natural-born snooper, always hunting for leverage or a fresh reason to criticize my ability to maintain the household. I picked up the telephone on Friday morning. I cleared my throat, then deliberately softened my voice, making it sound weak, raspy, and slightly breathless. I called Chloe's office line. When she answered, her tone was brisk and annoyed. I told her I had caught a nasty bug. I said my chest felt incredibly heavy, my vision was swimming, and I was entirely too dizzy to drive myself to the pharmacy to pick up some strong cough syrup. I asked if she could please swing by the house on her lunch hour just to bring me some medicine and a few cans of soup. She let out a heavy, dramatic sigh that vibrated sharply through the phone speaker. She loudly complained about a massive client deadline she was facing and how her assistant was entirely useless today. But eventually, she agreed, taking a moment to remind me of how massive of an inconvenience this favor was to her busy schedule. I thanked her profusely, playing the part of the frail, pathetic burden to absolute perfection. I spent the next 2 hours meticulously setting the stage for her arrival. I walked through the house and closed all the thick curtains, making the rooms feel dark, stifling, and depressing. I went into my bedroom and put on a pair of faded, oversized gray sweatpants and a worn-out flannel shirt that was missing a button. I ruffled my hair so it stuck up wildly in the back. Then, I took my heavy green canvas winter jacket. It was the coat I had worn to the garage every single day for a decade, stained with oil and smelling faintly of exhaust. I draped it haphazardly over the back of the wooden chair sitting directly in the entryway. It was the chair Chloe always used to drop her expensive designer handbag the moment she walked through the front door. I took the meticulously forged decoy lottery ticket. I folded it once and slid it into the front breast pocket of the canvas jacket. I pushed it down just enough so that it was secure, but I deliberately left exactly 1 inch of the top edge sticking out. The brightly colored, unmistakable lottery logo was highly visible, contrasting sharply against the dark green fabric of the coat. It was a beacon. It was a siren song for a woman who could not mind her own business. I went into the living room, laid down heavily on the sofa, and pulled a thick woven blanket all the way up to my chin. I closed my eyes, letting the stillness of the house wash over me, and focused on slowing my breathing to a shallow, ragged rhythm. I lay there in the dark, waiting for the inevitable sound of her expensive heels clicking aggressively up my concrete front walkway. As the brass handle on the front door finally began to rattle, I realized that once she took the bait, there would be absolutely no turning back for either of us, and the impending collision would shatter our family irrevocably. There is a specific kind of silence that falls over a house right before a heart is broken, heavy and suffocating like the air before a thunderstorm. I was about to find out just how little my own flesh and blood valued my life when $50 million was suddenly dropped right into their greedy laps. The front door swung open with a harsh, grating squeak that I had purposely neglected to oil. Chloe marched into the entryway, bringing a gust of cold autumn air and the overwhelming scent of her expensive floral perfume. She dropped her designer handbag onto the wooden chair with a loud, careless thud right next to my staged canvas jacket. I lay completely still on the living room sofa, keeping my eyes shut and my breathing measured, shallow, and slightly raspy. I could hear the rustle of the plastic pharmacy bag she had brought, filled with the cheap cough syrup and canned soup I had requested. She did not immediately call out my name or check to see if I was breathing. Instead, she let out a long, irritated sigh. Her high heels clicked against the hardwood floor, pacing back and forth in the small foyer. She was likely checking her phone, answering emails, entirely unconcerned with her supposedly sick elderly father lying just 15 feet away. Then, the clicking of her heels stopped abruptly. The silence stretched. It was a thick, electric pause. I knew exactly what had caught her eye. The bright, colorful logo of the state lottery, peeking out from the grease-stained pocket of my old winter coat. I heard the unmistakable, crisp slide of heavy paper being pulled from fabric. A sharp, sudden intake of breath echoed through the hallway. It was not a gasp of concern. It was the sound of a woman who had just stepped on a live wire. I heard her fingers tapping frantically against the glass screen of her smartphone. She was pulling up the winning numbers from Tuesday night. I kept my eyes closed, my heart pounding a furious rhythm against my ribs, waiting for the eruption of joy, waiting for her to rush into the living room and shake me awake with tears of disbelief. That eruption never came. Instead, I heard the rapid, muffled dialing of a phone call. She walked a few paces away, moving toward the kitchen to lower her voice. But in a quiet house, sound travels like water seeking a drain. "Marcus, pick up!" she hissed, her voice vibrating with a frantic, greedy energy. "Pick up your phone right now." There was a brief pause, followed by Marcus's tinny voice bleeding through the receiver. I could not hear his exact words, but his tone was annoyed and rushed. "Shut up and listen to me," Chloe snapped, all pretenses of her usual corporate polish completely gone. "I am at Dad's house." I was dropping off his stupid soup, and I found something in his jacket pocket. "It is a lottery ticket from Tuesday. Marcus, I just checked the numbers online. They match, all 6 of them." The line went dead silent. Even from the couch, I could feel the shockwave hit my son through the cellular connection. When Marcus finally spoke, his voice was a harsh, breathless whisper. "Are you out of your mind? Are you absolutely sure?" "I am staring right at it," she replied, her voice trembling with adrenaline. "It is the $50 million jackpot. He won it. Marcus, he actually won." I braced myself. This was the moment. This was the exact junction where they could choose to be a family or choose to be monsters. I waited for Marcus to tell her to wake me up, to call an ambulance if I was too sick, to celebrate the end of all our financial burdens together. I waited for the love that a son should have for his father to override the blinding allure of sudden wealth. "Put it in your purse," Marcus ordered, his voice suddenly cold, calculating, and ruthlessly authoritative. "Put it in your purse right now, and do not say a single word to him." A tear, hot and bitter, leaked from the corner of my closed eye and soaked into the woven blanket. They had failed. In less than 60 seconds, they had chosen $50 million over their own father. "But what if he remembers buying it?" Chloe asked, though there was no protest in her voice. Only logistical concern. "What if he is looking for it?" "He will not remember," Marcus scoffed, his tone dripping with utter disdain. "He could barely figure out how to turn on the television last Sunday. His mind is going, Chloe, we both know it. If we hand him this ticket, he will probably just lose it. Or worse, some scammer will call him and trick him into signing it away. We are protecting the asset. We are protecting our future." I squeezed my eyes shut, listening to my own son rationalize the theft of my property by weaponizing the fake cognitive decline I had displayed just days prior. They were not just stealing money. They were stealing my agency, my dignity, and my legacy. They were painting me as a helpless fool to justify their own profound moral corruption. Okay, it is in my bag," Chloe whispered, the sound of a zipper sealing my fate. Or so she thought. "But how do we cash it?" "The State Lottery Commission does not just hand over $50 million without a massive press conference. If we claim it, everyone will know it is his. We do not claim it as ourselves," Marcus said smoothly, his corporate instincts taking over. "We accelerate the plan. We were already talking about getting medical power of attorney and having him declared legally incompetent to sell the house. Now, we just move faster. We get him evaluated, we get the judge to sign off on our guardianship, and then we cash the ticket as his legal conservators. The money goes into an account we control, completely legally, on his behalf. And once he is tucked away in a care facility, we manage the estate as we see fit.
That is brilliant,
Chloe breathed, her voice practically purring with greed.
I know a guy, a lawyer who specializes in elder law.
He owes my agency a massive favor for doing crisis PR for him last year. He is ruthless, and he knows exactly which doctors to call to get a dementia diagnosis fast-tracked without asking too many questions. Call him the second you leave, Marcus instructed. Go into the living room, drop off the soup, act completely normal, and get out of there. We need this locked down within 2 weeks before the ticket expires, or he mentions it to a neighbor. I lay there, my chest tight and burning, knowing my secret trip to the state capitol would soon become the most vital, devastating maneuver of my entire life. They were assembling a team of corrupt professionals to lock me in a cage and steal a fortune, completely oblivious to the fact that I was already 10 steps ahead of them. I heard Chloe end the call. She took a deep breath, smoothing her clothes, adjusting her mask of familial concern. Her heels clicked from the hallway into the living room. I let out a low, pathetic groan, shifting weakly on the sofa and blinking my eyes open as if fighting through a heavy fever.
Dad,
Chloe asked, her voice suddenly dripping with a saccharin, entirely fabricated sweetness.
I brought your soup and medicine. You look awful.
I looked up at my daughter, seeing past the expensive makeup and the perfectly styled hair, seeing straight into the hollow, grasping void where her conscience used to be. The decoy ticket was resting comfortably inside her expensive leather purse, burning a hole of absolute treachery right through the room. I gave her a weak, grateful smile, playing my role perfectly while anticipating the exact moment I would pull the rug out from under their meticulously planned legal heist. A predator always believes it is the smartest creature in the forest right up until the cold steel of a trap snaps shut around its leg. While my children spent their weekend aggressively researching elder law and drafting the paperwork for my legal demise, I was quietly packing a single leather overnight bag to build an impenetrable fortress around my legacy. Monday morning arrived with a crisp, bitter chill in the air. I picked up my phone and called Chloe, deliberately making my voice sound reedy, exhausted, and incredibly weak. I told her the cough syrup she brought had helped, but I was still feeling incredibly dizzy and planned to spend the next 2 days sleeping in bed. I explicitly asked her not to bother coming over. Claiming I just needed absolute peace and quiet, she agreed far too quickly, her voice practically buzzing with suppressed excitement. I knew she was eager for the uninterrupted time to finalize whatever fraudulent medical documents her shady attorney contact was putting together. The moment I heard the click of the call disconnecting, the frail old man vanished. I showered, shaved with a steady hand, and put on the dark navy suit I had worn to Mary's funeral. It was the best piece of clothing I owned. I grabbed the small brass key to my safe deposit box, locked the front door of my house, and drove straight to the First National Bank. The teller let me into the vault without a second glance. I retrieved the genuine life-altering lottery ticket, slipped it securely into my interior breast pocket, and began the 3-hour drive toward the state capitol. I had spent my entire adult life dealing with heavy grease, stripped gears, and shattered engines. But I was not foolish enough to think those skills translated to high-stakes corporate warfare. I knew that fighting the ruthless sharks Marcus employed required hiring a bigger, much more vicious predator of my own. Over the weekend, using a secure browser on my tablet, I had researched the most aggressive, top-tier wealth management and estate law firm in the state capitol. I pulled my rusting pickup truck into the immaculate underground parking garage of a towering glass skyscraper. I took the elevator to the 50th floor and walked into a lobby made of imported Italian marble and polished steel. The receptionist, a young man in a tailored suit, gave me a polite but dismissive look, clearly seeing nothing more than an elderly mechanic in a dated, slightly frayed jacket who had wandered into the wrong building. I calmly asked to speak with the senior managing partner, a man named Arthur Vance. The receptionist began to offer a patronizing excuse about Mr. Vance being fully booked for the next 6 months. I leaned over the marble counter, my voice dropping to a low, commanding register. I told the young man that I possessed a bearer instrument worth $50 million, and if Mr. Vance did not have 10 minutes for me right now, I would gladly take my business to the rival firm directly across the street. 5 minutes later, I was sitting in a sprawling corner office overlooking the entire city. Arthur Vance was a sharp, calculating man with silver hair and eyes that missed absolutely nothing. He offered me a glass of expensive sparkling water, which I declined. I reached into my jacket, pulled out the small slip of paper, and gently placed the winning ticket on his polished mahogany desk. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The subtle condescension evaporated, replaced by absolute, razor-sharp professional focus. I spent 6 hours in that office with Vance and a team of the most brilliant financial minds money could buy. I did not mince words. I explained exactly what I needed: complete public anonymity and absolute, airtight financial insulation from my immediate family. I told them my children were actively conspiring to declare me mentally incompetent to seize my assets. Vance listened in grim silence, nodding slowly, recognizing the cold determination of a man who had survived a lifetime of hard labor and was prepared to fight to the death for his dignity. We established an irrevocable blind trust, naming it the Blue Hydrangea Trust in honor of the flowers Mary had always dreamed of planting on our imaginary porch. Through this impenetrable legal entity, the law firm would claim the $50 million jackpot entirely on my behalf. My name, my address, and my social security number would never appear on any public lottery registry or press release. The state allowed this specific maneuver to protect lottery winners from extortion, and we utilized every single legal loophole available. The funds, which amounted to roughly $30 million in liquid assets after federal and state taxes were instantly deducted, were wired directly into a complex web of heavily protected, diversified accounts that Vance's team managed. I knew Chloe's corrupt attorney would try to fast-track their fraudulent guardianship application, but he severely underestimated the impenetrable legal wall I was quietly building right under his nose. I signed the final stack of thick, watermarked documents just as the sun began to set over the city skyline. I handed Vance a generous retainer fee to act as my personal legal shield moving forward. I stood up, shook his hand, and walked out of the skyscraper. I was arguably one of the wealthiest men in the state. Yet as I climbed back into the worn fabric seat of my old truck, I felt a profound sense of hollow, agonizing victory. I had secured my future, but the immediate cost was the absolute, irrevocable destruction of the family I had spent 40 years trying to build. I drove the 3 hours back to my quiet suburban neighborhood in total silence. I pulled into my driveway, killed the engine, and sat in the dark for a long time, rehearsing the pathetic, shuffling walk of a man rapidly losing his grip on reality. By Wednesday evening, Marcus and Chloe were already setting their stage. They showed up unannounced, carrying a stack of thick manila folders and wearing identical, chilling expressions of manufactured concern. The moment they stepped through the door, the psychological warfare began. They did not attack directly. They used the quiet, insidious tactics of gaslighting to make me doubt my own sanity. Chloe subtly shifted my reading glasses from the side table to the kitchen counter when she thought I was in the bathroom, only to loudly and dramatically point out my supposed forgetfulness an hour later when I reached for them. Marcus asked me the exact same question about my upcoming property taxes 3 separate times in 20 minutes. He spoke slowly and loudly, aggressively typing notes into his smartphone, documenting my feigned confusion to build his fraudulent medical case. I played along flawlessly. I stuttered over my words. I rubbed my temples, closed my eyes, and stared blankly at the television screen when they asked me simple questions. I apologized profusely for my poor memory, watching the terrifying, triumphant gleam in their eyes grow brighter with every deliberate mistake I made. They genuinely thought they were breaking me down, softening my mind for the final, devastating legal blow. The money was locked safely away where they could never reach it. But the true, ultimate wealth I was about to acquire was watching my son and daughter willingly burn through their own resources trying to steal a ghost.
"Dad, you are really struggling today," Marcus said, placing a heavy hand on my shoulder, his voice thick with fake sympathy. "We cannot keep ignoring this. Chloe and I were talking, and we think it might be best if we bring a specialist by the house next week. Just a friendly doctor to have a chat with you. Make sure your head is on straight. And maybe a friend of Chloe's, a lawyer who helps seniors with their estate planning, just to make sure you are protected." "Protected?" I whispered, letting my hands tremble slightly in my lap. "Yes, I suppose I do need to be protected." I looked up at my son, offering him the terrified, compliant gaze of a broken old man, while behind my eyes, the Blue Hydrangea Trust was already fully funded, and the trap was armed and ready to snap. A predator relies on its prey being blind to the danger, but there is absolutely nothing more lethal than a target who has already memorized the hunter's every move. My children were about to orchestrate my mental decline, entirely unaware that I was meticulously documenting every single twisted lie they told. The gaslighting campaign shifted from subtle jabs to an all-out psychological assault by Friday morning. They were racing against a ticking clock, desperate to secure control over my estate so they could safely cash the $50 million decoy ticket currently burning a hole in Chloe's designer handbag. They needed me declared incompetent fast, and they threw every ounce of their energy into making me doubt my own sanity. Chloe began showing up unannounced before I had even finished my morning coffee. I watched her from the kitchen as she casually picked up the television remote from the armrest of my chair and slid it underneath the heavy sofa cushions. 10 minutes later, she loudly berated me for losing it, claiming my mind was rapidly slipping away and treating me like a foolish child. Marcus handled the logistical sabotage from afar. He called me on a Tuesday afternoon, absolutely furious, demanding to know why I had missed a dental appointment he claimed he had reminded me about 3 separate times. I had not been to the dentist in 6 months, and we had never discussed it, but he screamed through the phone, threatening to take away my car keys because I was becoming a severe hazard to myself and the community. It is a profoundly agonizing experience to watch your own flesh and blood try to convince you that your brain is rotting. If I had not secured my fortune safely within the blind trust, if I did not know their ultimate, greedy motive, their coordinated campaign might have actually worked. The sheer repetition of their lies was dizzying and deeply disorienting. They wanted me to feel utterly dependent on them, entirely helpless, and thoroughly isolated from the outside world. But every time Chloe rolled her eyes at my feigned confusion, and every time Marcus sighed loudly at my deliberate stutter, I simply touched the side of my flannel shirt. Tucked safely inside my breast pocket was a high-fidelity digital audio recorder I had purchased with cash from a local electronics store. It was running constantly, quietly spinning and capturing every cruel insult, every manipulated argument, and every fabricated reality they tried to force upon my shoulders. They genuinely believed they were building an ironclad case for a judge, compiling an undeniable mountain of fake evidence regarding my dementia. They did not know that Arthur Vance and his elite team of ruthless corporate litigators were simply waiting for me to deliver the final piece of the puzzle, a piece that would permanently incinerate my children's futures and leave them completely defenseless. The climax of their psychological warfare arrived on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Chloe and Marcus pulled into my driveway in Marcus's expensive black sedan. They were not alone. Trailing behind them, stepping carefully to avoid the puddles, was a tall, excessively slick man wearing a sharp gray suit. He smelled heavily of cheap, aggressive cologne and carried a thick, imposing leather briefcase. I was sitting in my worn recliner, the audio recorder already silently armed in my pocket. I forced my hands to shake as I gripped the padded armrests, staring blankly at the front door as they confidently let themselves inside. "Dad, we brought a friend to see you," Chloe announced, her voice dripping with that same artificial, saccharine sweetness she reserved for her most gullible public relations clients. "This is Elias. He is a very smart lawyer who helps families make sure their paperwork is in order when things get a little bit confusing for older folks." Elias stepped forward,
flashing a brilliant, entirely predatory smile that did not reach his cold eyes. He reached out and shook my hand firmly, speaking to me in a slow, patronizing cadence. "It is an absolute pleasure to meet you, sir," Elias said, his voice smooth and heavily practiced. "Your children love you very much, and they are terribly worried about your recent memory lapses. We just want to make sure you are fully protected from any bad actors out there who might try to take advantage of your vulnerable situation. We have some very simple, standard documents for you to look over. They just give Marcus and Chloe the ability to help pay your bills and manage the upkeep of this beautiful house so you do not have to stress your tired mind." It was a masterful, sickening performance of false empathy. He clicked open the brass latches of his briefcase, pulled out a thick stack of watermarked legal documents, and spread them across my wooden coffee table. I glanced down at the bold, terrifying headings printed at the top of the pages: enduring power of attorney, medical proxy, voluntary transfer of deed. They were not asking for permission to help me pay my monthly water bill. They were asking me to sign away my entire existence. They wanted total, unchecked control over my property, my future medical decisions, and my bank accounts. I leaned forward, squinting hard at the papers, deliberately letting my jaw hang slightly slack. "I do not understand," I whispered, injecting a heavy dose of sheer panic into my trembling voice. "Am I losing my house? Mary and I worked for 40 hard years to pay for this house. I cannot leave my home." Marcus knelt down beside my chair, putting a heavy, suffocating arm around my shoulders. "Nobody is taking your house. Dad!" He lied flawlessly, staring right into my eyes without a single blink of hesitation. "But you are forgetting important things. You are confused all the time now. If you forget to pay the property taxes, the city will come and take the house anyway. You need to sign these papers so I can protect the estate for you. It is just a legal formality. You trust me, right? I am your only son." I looked from Marcus to Chloe, and then to the grinning, corrupt lawyer. I needed them to explicitly state their coercive intent for the hidden microphone resting just inches away from their faces. I needed irrefutable proof of their elder abuse. "But what if I do not want to sign anything today?" I asked, my voice cracking perfectly in the quiet room. "What if I just want to stay here alone? I can still manage by myself." Chloe's fake, patient smile instantly vanished, replaced by a flash of genuine, ugly anger that twisted her features. She stepped closer, her tone sharp, aggressive, and highly threatening. "You cannot manage anything. Dad!" she snapped, pointing a manicured finger at my chest. "You are a danger to yourself. If you do not sign these documents right now, Elias is going to take all of my written notes and Marcus's documentation straight to a judge tomorrow morning. We will have you declared legally incompetent by the state, and they will throw you in a locked psychiatric ward. Is that what you want? To be dragged out of your own house by strangers?" Elias cleared his throat loudly, attempting to soften her aggressively illegal approach, but the permanent damage was already recorded. "What your daughter means, sir," Elias interjected smoothly, "is that the legal alternative to a voluntary signature is a very lengthy, very public, and very humiliating court process. It is much easier and cheaper for everyone involved if you just sign the power of attorney over to them today. It is for your own good. We can bypass the messy medical evaluations and just get this settled peacefully." I felt a surge of cold. Pure adrenaline coursed through my veins. I had everything I needed. Their overt blackmail, their explicit threats of forced institutionalization, and the lawyer's verbal complicity in bypassing legal medical evaluations were all captured in crystal clear, undeniable audio. But I could not end the game just yet. The trap was fully armed, but I needed them to feel the sheer, suffocating frustration of a massive delay. I slowly reached out and picked up the heavy silver pen Elias offered me. I held it over the bottom signature line, letting my hand shake violently. The tip of the pen tapped erratically against the thick paper, leaving small, scattered blue dots near my printed name. Marcus held his breath, his eyes glued to my trembling hand.
Chloe leaned in so close I could smell her perfume, her eyes wide with unadulterated, burning greed. They could practically taste the $50 million they thought they were about to secure. Suddenly, I dropped the pen. It clattered loudly against the hardwood floor, rolling under the sofa. I slumped back heavily into my recliner and began to weep. They were dry, forced sobs, but they sounded entirely pathetic, overwhelmed, and completely broken. "I am too tired today," I cried out, covering my face with my trembling hands. "My head hurts so badly. My chest is tight. I cannot read these tiny words today. My eyes are blurry. I need to sleep." "Please, just leave the papers on the table. I promise I will try to read them tomorrow when I wake up." The groan of pure, unfiltered rage that escaped Marcus's throat was the sweetest music I had ever heard. He was absolutely furious that his massive payday had just slipped through his fingers because of an old man's sudden headache, entirely unaware that the real delay was simply me setting the ultimate stage for their absolute, devastating ruin. There is a dangerous breaking point in every high-stakes con, a moment when the grifter loses their patience and the ugly, unvarnished truth violently claws its way to the surface. For my children, that moment arrived exactly 48 hours after my feigned breakdown, when the intoxicating allure of $50 million completely eroded whatever fragile mask of sanity they had left. They thought my delay was just the stubborn, confused resistance of a deteriorating mind, completely blind to the fact that I was merely giving Arthur Vance the extra 2 days he needed to legally finalize the sale of the very house we were standing inside. It was Saturday morning. The heavy, oppressive silence of my living room was shattered by the sound of the front door flying open so violently it slammed against the interior drywall. I did not even have time to stand up from my recliner before Marcus and Chloe marched into the room. The slick, grinning lawyer was nowhere to be seen today. They did not need a legal buffer for what they were about to do. They had come to break me themselves. They both looked entirely disheveled, a stark contrast to their usual pristine corporate appearances. Marcus had dark, heavy bags under his eyes, his tie loosened and his jaw tight with poorly concealed rage. Chloe looked absolutely frantic, her designer hair pulled back into a messy knot, clutching her expensive leather handbag with white-knuckled desperation. The forged lottery ticket was still inside that bag, burning a hole in her conscience and driving her to the brink of absolute madness. They had spent the last 2 days tasting a fortune they could not legally touch until I signed my life away, and the forced delay had turned them feral. Marcus did not offer a fake, sympathetic smile. He did not ask how my headache was or if I was feeling any better. He simply reached into his briefcase, pulled out the crumpled stack of legal documents I had abandoned on Thursday, and threw them aggressively onto the coffee table. The heavy paper slapped against the wood with a sharp, undeniable finality. "We are done playing games. Dad!" Marcus snarled, his voice stripped of every single ounce of manufactured warmth. "You are going to pick up a pen, and you are going to sign every single page right now. I am not leaving this house until you do." I looked up at him, keeping my hands resting loosely on the arms of my chair. I dropped the stutter. I dropped the confused, trembling facade. I simply stared at him, letting the heavy silence stretch between us. My calmness seemed to infuriate him even more. "Did you hear me?" Marcus yelled, taking a threatening step toward my chair. "I am absolutely sick of driving out here. I am sick of dealing with your stubbornness. You cannot even remember where you put the television remote, yet you think you can manage a 4-bedroom estate. You are a massive liability. If you trip and fall down those stairs tomorrow, Chloe and I are the ones who have to clean up the mess and drain our savings to pay for your round-the-clock care. We are not doing it. We have our own lives. Your own lives," I repeated softly, my voice clear and completely steady. "Yes, our own lives," Chloe interjected, her voice rising to a shrill, hysterical pitch. "My agency is struggling. I am drowning in overhead costs, and Marcus is facing a massive tax penalty at the end of the quarter. And here you sit, hoarding hundreds of thousands of dollars in equity in a house that is entirely too big for you, just waiting to die. It is incredibly selfish. You are completely useless to us sitting here like this.
You are a drain on our futures. The words hung in the air, cold and unforgiving. Useless. A drain. Hoarding. They were completely erasing 40 years of my blood, sweat, and agonizing physical labor. They were erasing the 20 years Mary and I spent skipping vacations and driving rusted cars just so they could graduate debt-free and step into luxury. I looked at my daughter, remembering the day I taught her how to ride a bicycle in the driveway outside, holding onto the back of her seat until my back screamed in pain, just to keep her from falling. Now, she was looking at me as if I were a piece of rotting garbage stinking up her pristine life. "And where exactly do you plan to put me once I sign this house over to you?" I asked, looking directly into Chloe's frantic eyes. "We found a place," Marcus answered quickly, his tone dismissive and incredibly callous. "It is a state-run facility about 40 miles north of here. It is not fancy, but it has locked doors so you cannot wander off and embarrass us. It will take your pension and your Social Security to cover the monthly fees. And we will take the house to cover our immediate expenses."
It is the only logical solution.
A state-run facility, 40 miles away, locked doors. They had not even bothered to look for a comfortable assisted living community. They had deliberately chosen the absolute cheapest, most isolated warehouse for discarded elderly people they could find, all to maximize the profit they intended to pull from my estate before cashing the $50 million ticket they thought they had stolen.
They wanted to lock me in a cage. They wanted me to die alone, confused and heavily medicated in a sterile room, completely stripped of my dignity, just so they could buy new luxury cars and fund failing business ventures.
"You want to throw me away," I stated, feeling a strange, profound sense of peace settle over my chest. The last lingering shred of parental guilt I had been harboring instantly evaporated.
"Do not play the victim,"
Chloe snapped, her grip on her handbag tightening so fiercely I thought the leather strap might snap. She was dangerously close to the edge, completely unaware of the absolute humiliation waiting for her on Monday morning. "You owe us this. You brought us into this world, and it is your job to make sure we succeed. Mom would have wanted us to have this money. She would have hated watching you rot in this house alone." Using Mary's name was the final, unforgivable transgression. To weaponize the memory of my beautiful, selfless wife to justify their demonic greed was a line I could never allow them to uncross. I looked at the two strangers standing in my living room. They wore the faces of my children, but their souls were entirely foreign. They were hollow, grasping, and fundamentally broken. I absorbed their verbal abuse, letting their vicious insults wash over me like a cold, cleansing rain. I did not feel sorrow anymore. I did not feel the agonizing heartbreak of a betrayed father. I felt the cold, terrifying clarity of a judge who had just heard the final, damning testimony and was fully prepared to deliver the execution order. This was the absolute confirmation I needed. They were completely beyond redemption.
"Sign the papers, Dad,"
Marcus demanded one last time, tapping his heavy knuckles aggressively against the coffee table. "Do not make me call the police and tell them you are having a violent manic episode, because I will do it. I will have you dragged out of here in handcuffs if I have to. I am done asking nicely." I looked down at the documents, the enduring power of attorney and the voluntary transfer of deed, waiting for my signature. I took a deep, steadying breath, preparing to drop the act completely and unleash the absolute devastation I had meticulously engineered over the past week. "All right," I said quietly, leaning forward and resting my forearms on my knees. "All right, Marcus, we will do this your way." A man pushed to the absolute edge of his sanity does not shatter. He simply hardens into something entirely unyielding and completely cold. The ink in the heavy silver pen sitting on my coffee table was about to permanently rewrite the history of our family, but not in the way my greedy children had so desperately planned. I looked at Marcus, letting my shoulders slump one final time, and whispered that if I was going to sign my life away,
I wanted the lawyer present to make sure it was completely legal. Marcus smirked, a triumphant, ugly expression that twisted his face, and immediately pulled out his smartphone. He dialed Elias, who, as it turned out, had been waiting in his running car at the very end of my street the entire morning, ready to swoop in the exact moment I broke. Within 3 minutes, the front door rattled open, and Elias strode into the living room, carrying his leather briefcase and wearing that same predatory, artificial smile. "Ah, excellent," Elias purred, aggressively rubbing his hands together as he approached the coffee table. "A very wise decision. Sir, you are doing the absolute right thing for your health and your family's peace of mind." He quickly arranged the thick stack of watermarked papers, ensuring the enduring power of attorney, the medical proxy, and the voluntary deed transfer were perfectly aligned. He uncapped his heavy silver fountain pen and laid it gently across the bottom signature line. Chloe hovered right over my left shoulder, her breathing shallow and incredibly fast, her eyes locked onto the blank space where my name was supposed to go. Marcus stood on my right side, his arms crossed over his chest, acting as the physical enforcer of this agonizing transaction. They had cornered their prey, entirely oblivious to the fact that they were standing in the center of a heavily fortified trap. I reached out and slowly picked up the pen. For the past week, I had meticulously trained my hand to shake, to hover erratically, and to project the flawless image of failing motor skills. But as my fingers closed around the cool metal barrel, the tremors completely and instantly vanished. My grip was absolute, steady, and hardened by 40 years of turning heavy steel wrenches. I did not bend over the paper. Instead, I slowly sat back, pressing my shoulders firmly against the worn leather of my recliner. I rolled my neck, taking a deep, even breath that fully expanded my chest, and I looked directly into the corrupt attorney's eyes. "You know, Elias," I said, my voice no longer reedy, no longer frail, but dropping back down to the deep, gravelly, commanding baritone I used when running a busy garage floor. A competent lawyer should really verify the medical facts before attempting to execute a blatantly fraudulent medical proxy. It is a massive professional liability. The shift in the room's atmosphere was instantaneous and entirely suffocating. The smug, practiced smile slid off Elias's face as if it had been wiped away by a wet rag. He froze, his hand hovering awkwardly over his briefcase. Marcus uncrossed his arms, taking a hesitant half-step backward, his brow furrowing in deep, panicked confusion. Chloe let out a small, sharp gasp, her hand instinctively flying to her chest. I did not break eye contact with Elias. I let the heavy, terrifying silence stretch for 10 agonizing seconds, allowing them to fully process the reality that the confused, broken old man they had been torturing had just completely vanished into thin air. "Dad?" Marcus asked, his voice suddenly sounding remarkably small, entirely stripped of its previous aggressive authority. "What are you talking about?" "Just sign the papers." I slowly turned my gaze to my son, letting all the cold, unvarnished disgust I felt radiate directly from my eyes. "I am talking about the meticulous, highly illegal gaslighting campaign you two have been running all week," I stated, articulating every single syllable with razor-sharp, terrifying clarity. "Let us review the evidence you carefully gathered. Shall we? Chloe, you hid my television remote under the middle sofa cushion on Monday at exactly 9 in the morning, right after you purposely moved my reading glasses to the kitchen counter to manufacture a lapse in my memory. Marcus, you screamed at me for missing a dental appointment with Dr. Aris on Tuesday afternoon, which is incredibly fascinating considering Dr. Aris retired 5 years ago and moved to Florida." The color began to rapidly drain from Chloe's cheeks, leaving her looking sickly and pale beneath her expensive foundation. They were entirely paralyzed, utterly incapable of comprehending the fact that their supposedly dementia-riddled father possessed a sharper, more unforgiving memory than both of them combined. I was mentally cataloging their exact reactions, knowing my new legal counsel in the capital would be absolutely thrilled with the first-hand account of their crumbling conspiracy. and the hidden microphone resting in my pocket was capturing every stuttered breath they took. "You thought you were breaking my mind," I continued, my voice steady and completely devoid of any paternal warmth. "You thought I was just a stubborn, deteriorating obstacle standing between you and a massive payday? You brought this cheap, two-bit legal hack into my home to threaten me with a state-run psychiatric ward. You thought you had all the leverage because you believed I was blind to your absolute, fundamental greed." I turned my attention fully to Chloe, who was now visibly trembling, her knuckles completely white as she gripped the strap of her designer bag. I let a slow, terrifying smile spread across my face. "By the way, Chloe," I asked casually, leaning forward and lowering my voice to a deadly, perfectly calibrated whisper, "how exactly is that lottery ticket holding up inside your purse? Have you and your brother figured out how to safely launder $50 million yet?" If I had reached across the wooden coffee table and struck her across the face, the physical shock would have been significantly less severe. Chloe's mouth fell open, her eyes widening in absolute, unadulterated horror. She stumbled backward, her high heels catching on the thick edge of the living room rug. She nearly fell backward into the television stand before Marcus frantically reached out and caught her arm. Marcus looked at his sister, his face completely devoid of color, and then back at me, his expression twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. The massive secret they had guarded so fiercely, the sole catalyst for their entire malicious, highly illegal plot, had just been completely detonated right in their faces. "You knew," Chloe stammered, her voice thin and reedy, completely shattering the aggressive, entitled persona she had worn just moments prior. "You remember buying it? Remember?" I let out a harsh, barking laugh that echoed loudly through the silent, tense house. "Chloe, I never forgot a single thing. I did not forget buying it. I did not forget checking the winning numbers, and I certainly did not forget exactly where I placed it so you would inevitably find it. You honestly thought I left a $50 million bearer instrument sticking out of my greasy work coat. By accident, I have rebuilt intricate transmission systems that require microscopic precision. I do not make careless mistakes." Elias, finally realizing the catastrophic legal quicksand he had just willingly stepped into, began hastily and frantically gathering his documents. His hands were shaking so badly he dropped the power of attorney form twice, the heavy paper fluttering onto the rug. He smelled heavily of stale sweat and cheap cologne. He knew that participating in the coercion of an elder who was fully lucid, highly articulate, and entirely aware of a massive financial theft was more than enough to have him permanently disbarred and heavily prosecuted for fraud. But he could not leave. I was not finished locking the heavy steel doors on their futures. "You stole from me," I said, pointing a steady, accusatory finger directly at Marcus, who was now sweating profusely, his expensive dress shirt clinging to his chest. "You discovered I had secured generational wealth, and your immediate, unflinching instinct was to steal it. Lock me in a discount medical prison, and declare me legally dead so you could fund your pathetic, hollow lives. You proved exactly who you are. And now, you are going to pay the absolute maximum price for your betrayal." I watched them entirely break down, staring at me as if I were a ghost who had just risen from the grave to drag them down into the dirt, completely unaware that the ticket they were so terrified of losing was nothing more than a worthless piece of garbage. And the real devastation had not even begun. The sudden realization of impending doom is a fascinating thing to witness in people who have spent their entire lives believing they are untouchable. I watched my children desperately clinging to the edge of a cliff they had built themselves, entirely unaware that I was about to crush their fingers. Marcus was breathing so heavily I could see his chest heaving under his expensive tailored shirt, while Chloe stood frozen, her manicured nails digging deep into the soft leather of her handbag. Elias, the disgraced attorney, was frantically trying to zip his briefcase, his eyes darting toward the front door like a trapped rat calculating its escape route. "Take it out, Chloe," I commanded, my voice slicing through the heavy, suffocating silence of the living room.
Take the ticket out of your purse and put it on the coffee table."
"Right now?" She hesitated, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and greedy defiance.
She looked at Marcus for help, but her brother was completely paralyzed, his arrogant facade entirely shattered by the terrifying clarity of my tone.
"I said take it out," I repeated, standing up slowly from my recliner. I drew myself up to my full height, ignoring the slight ache in my knees, projecting the formidable presence of a man who had spent 40 years commanding a noisy, dangerous garage floor. With a violently shaking hand, Chloe unzipped her bag. She reached inside and pulled out the folded slip of paper. She laid it on the wooden table, right next to the fraudulent medical proxy documents she had just tried to force me to sign. The brightly colored lottery logo stared up at us, a silent testament to her absolute moral failure. I reached down, picked up the ticket, and held it up to the light streaming through the living room window. "You were so blinded by your own sickening greed that you did not even bother to look closely at your prize," I said, a cold, humorless smile touching the corners of my mouth. "Did you honestly think I would leave a bearer instrument worth $50 million sitting in an unlocked house with a daughter who has a lifelong habit of snooping through my mail?" Marcus finally found his voice, though it cracked pathetically. "What are you talking about? We checked the numbers. They match perfectly." "Of course they match perfectly," I replied smoothly, tossing the slip of paper back onto the table as if it were a dirty napkin. "Because I spent 4 agonizing hours in my garage last Thursday morning with a jeweler's magnifying glass, a hobby knife, and a tiny bottle of specialized matte adhesive. I carefully sliced the winning numbers off a stack of my old losing tickets and glued them directly over a brand new, randomly generated ticket from the corner store. I even rubbed a little dust from the shop floor on it to make it look authentic. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a massive, glittering fantasy violently imploding in real time. "It is a fake," I stated clearly, watching the devastating truth wash over them. "It is a meticulously engineered counterfeit. You stole a piece of garbage, Chloe, and you were ready to lock your own father in a state-run psychiatric ward over a worthless scrap of paper." Chloe let out a strangled, breathless noise, her knees buckling slightly. She slumped onto the armrest of the sofa, her hands covering her mouth, her eyes darting frantically between the fake ticket and my face. Marcus looked physically ill, his skin taking on a sickening pale green hue. The massive tax bill he thought he was going to magically erase was suddenly crashing back down onto his shoulders. "But if that is a fake," Marcus stammered, his mind desperately trying to catch up to the terrifying reality I had constructed, "where is the real one?" "The real one was secured inside a steel vault at the First National Bank before you even stepped foot in this house to drop off my soup," I explained, relishing the absolute destruction of their plans. "And while you two were busy researching corrupt elder law attorneys and drafting these pathetic guardianship papers, I was sitting in a corner office on the 50th floor of a skyscraper in the state capitol." Elias stopped zipping his briefcase, his head snapping up at the mention of the Capitol. He knew exactly what kind of legal firepower resided in those buildings. "I hired Arthur Vance," I said, dropping the name like a heavy anvil onto the coffee table. Elias visibly flinched. Vance was a legend in the state, a legal shark who destroyed careers for sport. "Mr. Vance and his team established the Blue Hydrangea Trust. They cashed the real ticket on my behalf, completely anonymously. After taxes, there is roughly $30 million in liquid assets sitting in heavily fortified accounts that you will never, ever be able to touch." "$30 million?" Chloe whispered through her fingers, tears of pure, unadulterated loss finally spilling down her cheeks. She was not crying for me. She was mourning the death of her unearned luxury. "And Mr. Vance was highly interested in the situation regarding my children," I continued, reaching into the breast pocket of my flannel shirt. I pulled out the small, black digital audio recorder and placed it firmly on top of the fake lottery ticket. The red recording light was still blinking steadily. "This device has been running for days," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerously quiet register. "It captured you, Chloe, threatening to have me dragged out of my house in handcuffs. It captured you, Marcus, confirming your plan to dump me in a discount facility so you could maximize the equity of my estate. And it captured you, Elias, verbally aiding and abetting the coercion of an elder to bypass mandatory medical evaluations. Elias turned the color of ash. He practically lunged for his briefcase, completely abandoning his professional demeanor. I had absolutely no idea they were acting maliciously, Elias babbled, his voice high-pitched and frantic. I was told you were experiencing severe cognitive decline. I am a victim of their misrepresentation. I am leaving right now. You are leaving, but you are not a victim, I corrected him sharply, pointing a firm finger at his chest. Mister, Vance already has copies of every single recording from earlier this week. If you ever attempt to contact me, or if you ever practice elder law in this county again, he will hand those tapes directly to the State Bar Association and the district attorney. Now get out of my house before I decide to call the police and have you arrested for trespassing. Elias did not say another word. He grabbed the handle of his briefcase, nearly tripped over the edge of the rug, and sprinted out the front door, leaving it wide open. The sound of his car tires squealing down the street echoed through the quiet neighborhood. I turned my attention back to my children. They were completely isolated now, stripped of their legal shield and exposed for the greedy, soulless predators they truly were. As for the two of you, I said, leaning over the coffee table and looking directly into their terrified eyes, I spent 40 years breaking my back to make sure you had everything you ever wanted. I gave you my youth, my energy, and my money. In return, the second you thought I had outlived my usefulness, you plotted to strip away my freedom and throw me in a cage. Marcus opened his mouth, perhaps to offer a pathetic apology, perhaps to try and negotiate, but I immediately held up my hand, silencing him instantly. Do not speak, I commanded. There is absolutely nothing you can say that will change what happens next. Yesterday afternoon, Mr. Vance officially updated my last will and testament. You are both written out completely. You will not receive a single dime of the $30 million. You will not receive my pension. You will not receive my life insurance. When I die, every single asset I own will be donated to various charities and a scholarship fund in your mother's name. You are entirely cut off from my life, effectively, immediately. Chloe began to sob loudly, the harsh, ugly sounds of a woman realizing her failing business was going to collapse and she had absolutely no one left to bail her out. Marcus just stared at the floor, his hands trembling at his sides, the crushing weight of his massive tax debt and his imminent financial ruin suffocating him. They had lost the fortune. They had lost their father. But they still believed they had one final, pathetic string to cling to, completely unaware that Mr. Vance had already finalized the most devastating maneuver of all regarding the very floorboards beneath their feet. There is a distinct, agonizing sound when the final pillar of a person's entitlement crumbles into dust, leaving them entirely exposed to the ruin they built for themselves. My children were about to realize that the very ground they were standing on to launch their betrayal no longer belonged to them, and the financial sinkhole they had just dug would soon swallow them whole. Marcus and Chloe were completely broken, staring at the forged lottery ticket and the blinking audio recorder as if they were venomous snakes. They had lost the $50 million they thought they were entitled to, and they had just been permanently severed from my $30 million reality. But as they stood in my living room, weeping over their shattered financial fantasies, they still believed they had one final safety net. They still believed that when I eventually passed away, they could at least swoop in, claim the 4-bedroom colonial house, and sell it to cover their mounting debts. I decided it was time to burn that final bridge to ashes. You both look like you are waiting for a consolation prize, I said, my voice cutting through Chloe's pathetic sobbing. You are standing in my living room, calculating how much longer I have to live so you can at least inherit this property. You are probably thinking you can just wait me out. Marcus snapped his head up, his eyes bloodshot and wide with a desperate, pleading panic. He knew exactly what was coming, but he was entirely powerless to stop it.
Do not do this. Dad! Marcus begged, his voice cracking, completely devoid of the arrogant corporate executive persona he wore like armor. Please, I am facing a massive audit. I need the equity. I will lose my firm. I will lose everything. You already lost everything the moment you chose greed over your own family, I replied coldly. And you are severely mistaken if you think there is any equity left for you to steal. While you two were busy staging a fake intervention with a corrupt lawyer, Arthur Vance was executing a commercial real estate transaction on my behalf. I signed the final closing documents on Wednesday afternoon. Chloe stopped crying, her breath catching in her throat as a new, paralyzing wave of horror washed over her. I sold the house. Marcus, I stated clearly, letting the absolute finality of the words sink deep into their bones. I sold it entirely in cash to a massive commercial developer. They do not want the house. They are going to bulldoze this entire property next month to build a row of luxury townhouses. I got $800,000 for it, and every single penny went directly into the Blue Hydrangea Trust. The devastation on their faces was absolute and incredibly profound. The monument to my 40 years of hard labor, the home where their mother had loved them and raised them, was going to be erased from the earth, just as they had tried to erase my dignity and my freedom. The developer takes full legal possession in exactly 30 days, I continued, pointing toward the front window. You have exactly 30 days to come here and clear out all the useless garbage, the old furniture and the failed business inventory you have been hoarding in my garage for the past decade. If your belongings are not gone by the end of the month, the demolition crew will crush them into dust along with the foundation. You do not have a childhood home anymore. You are entirely on your own. The absolute reality of their situation finally shattered the fragile alliance they had built, the sibling bond, forged entirely in the fires of mutual greed, instantly violently disintegrated. Chloe turned to her brother, her face twisting into a mask of pure, vicious hatred. "This is your fault," Chloe shrieked, shoving Marcus hard in the chest. "You pushed for this." "You were the one who said we needed to get guardianship immediately because of your stupid tax penalty. If you had just let me cash the ticket quietly, none of this would be happening." "Are you completely insane?" Marcus roared back, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. "You are the idiot who found the ticket in the first place. You brought Elias into this house. Do you have any idea how much money we owe him? We paid him a $10,000 non-refundable retainer fee yesterday morning just to prioritize the paperwork, and he just ran out the front door. I am financially ruined because of your massive stupidity." "My stupidity!" she screamed, slapping her hands against her sides. "My public relations agency is completely bankrupt. Marcus, I maxed out 3 credit cards to keep the lights on this month because you promised me we were getting $50 million today. You ruined my life." I stood by the coffee table and watched them tear each other to shreds. They were vicious, cruel, and entirely selfish, blaming each other for a catastrophe they had equally engineered. They were entirely consumed by their own impending ruin, screaming about tax audits, bankruptcies, and maxed-out credit cards. They had tried to lock me in a cage, and instead, they had locked themselves in a prison of insurmountable debt and legal jeopardy. I did not raise my voice. I did not tell them to stop. I simply turned my back on them. I walked out of the living room, leaving the forged ticket and the audio recorder sitting on the table. I went into my master bedroom and picked up the single leather overnight bag I had packed 3 days ago. It contained a few changes of clothes, my shaving kit, and the framed photograph of Mary that I always kept on my nightstand. I did not need anything else. The trust had already arranged for an entire estate's worth of new furniture to be delivered to my next destination. I walked back down the hallway, my footsteps entirely masked by the sound of my children screaming obscenities at one another in the living room. They did not even notice me walk past them. They were too busy drowning in their own toxic resentment. I opened the front door and stepped out into the crisp autumn air. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the sweet, incredible scent of absolute freedom. The heavy, suffocating weight I had carried since Mary died. The burden of trying to love children who only viewed me as an ATM was entirely gone. Idling quietly at the end of my concrete walkway was a sleek, midnight black luxury town car. The driver, a polite man in a dark suit, immediately stepped out and opened the rear door for me. I handed him my small leather bag, and he placed it gently in the trunk. Before I got into the car, I turned around and looked at the house one final time. I could still hear the faint, muffled sounds of Marcus and Chloe fighting bitterly inside. I felt absolutely no regret. I felt no sorrow. I had given them everything, and they had shown me exactly what that sacrifice was worth to them. I was leaving them with exactly what they deserved each other. I slid into the spacious back seat of the town car. The soft leather wrapped around me, a stark contrast to the grease-stained seats of the old pickup truck I was leaving parked in the driveway. The driver closed my door, shielding me entirely from the noise of my past. "Where to, sir?" the driver asked respectfully, looking at me through the rearview mirror. "Take me to the coast," I replied, a genuine, peaceful smile finally breaking across my face. "I have a beach house with a wraparound porch and an acre of blue hydrangeas waiting for me." The car glided smoothly away from the curb, leaving the suburban neighborhood and the wreckage of my former family far behind. I looked out the tinted window, watching the trees pass by, feeling the presence of Mary sitting right beside me, knowing I had finally protected our legacy from the very monsters we had unknowingly raised. Thank you so much for watching my story. If you enjoyed seeing a hard-working father take back his dignity and deliver absolute justice to his ungrateful children, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with anyone who needs a reminder that respect is earned, not inherited. Leave the word karma in the comments below to let me know you stayed until the very end. And do not forget to hit the hype button so this story can reach more viewers like you.